Every Friday night for almost a decade, tens of millions of Americans sat down in front of their television sets and laughed at the same man. He was slow-talking, wide-eyed, and sweeter than anything Hollywood had seen before. They thought they knew exactly who he was. They thought he was simple. They thought he was harmless. They were wrong about almost everything. The truth about Jim Nabors was buried so deep for so long that even the people closest to him only knew pieces of it. There was the voice America heard every week, that funny, slow Southern drawl that made the whole country smile. And then there was the other voice, the one he only let out on a stage, singing opera so powerfully that grown men sat in stunned silence, wondering how that same mouth could produce two completely different sounds. But the two voices were only the beginning. Behind both of them was a man carrying secrets that would have destroyed his career if they had come out at the wrong time, in the wrong decade. This is the real story of Jim Nabors. And it is nothing like the one you think you already know. He was born on June 12, 1930, in a small Alabama town called Sylacauga, about 40 miles southeast of Birmingham. His father, Fred, worked as a local police officer. His mother, Mavis Pearl, kept the home and raised the children. From his very first years, his life looked different from every other kid on his street. Asthma kept him indoors most of the time. The attacks were serious and came without warning. And because of that, the world Jim Nabors grew up in was much smaller than the one his neighbors knew. While other boys ran through yards and played rough games in the Alabama heat, Jim sat near open windows and watched from inside. Most children in that situation would have slowly fallen behind. Jim did something else entirely. He started performing through the window. He sang to the kids outside, did funny voices, bird calls, and imitations of sounds he had memorized by listening carefully, because listening was one of the few things his body freely allowed. He learned hymns by ear, joined the glee club and choir at school, and picked up the clarinet. Somewhere in all of that, without any plan, two very different voices began to form inside him. One was a deep, rich church baritone, so powerful it seemed to belong to a man 3 times his size. The other was a slow, high, goofy, southern drawl built piece by piece, just to make people laugh. He was just a sick kid in Alabama, trying to connect with the world outside his window, and he had no idea those two voices were going to change his entire life. In 1948, he enrolled at the University of Alabama and chose business administration. He graduated in 1952, moved to New York City, and spent about a year typing documents for the United Nations. The city never felt like home. Too loud, too cold, too indifferent. So he left, moved to Chattanooga, worked as a film cutter at a local NBC affiliate, and eventually headed west to Los Angeles, where he took a job as a film editor at NBC's Burbank studios. At night, almost as an afterthought, he started performing at a small cabaret on Wilshire Boulevard called The Horn. He would walk out on that tiny stage and sing a full operatic ballad in that enormous baritone, and the room would go completely silent. Then between songs he would switch into that slow, ridiculous, high-pitched country voice, and the crowd would lose themselves laughing. He made about $50 a week doing it and had no agent, no manager, and no real belief that any of this was going anywhere. He was 31 years old, performing a strange, funny act in a small room for tips. That was the whole picture. Then one night in late 1962, a comedian named Bill Dana walked in. Dana was also head writer for The Steve Allen Show, and he understood exactly what made audiences react. He watched the act and put Jim Nabors on national television. Before the broadcast, Jim called his mother from a pay phone to tell her. She asked what he was going to do. He said he was going to sing. The line went quiet. She had heard him sing his whole life, and it had never occurred to her that national television would want that from him. Soon after, Andy Griffith heard about the act and came to see it himself. Griffith was already one of the biggest names in American television and was looking for a new comic character for his show's 3rd season. He watched the whole performance, went backstage, and told Jim he did not fully understand what he had just seen, but he was absolutely certain it was good. 2 weeks later, CBS called. Jim Nabors was offered a guest role as a gas station attendant named Gomer Pyle. The episode aired in November 1962, and CBS was flooded with letters. Viewers wanted more of this slow, sweet, strange man who seemed to exist outside everything cynical the modern world had become. By season's end, Andy Griffith had pushed hard enough to give Gomer a permanent place on the show. By 1960, for the character had become so popular that CBS gave him his own series. Gomer Pyle USMC premiered on September 25, 1964, and ran for 5 full seasons. During its best years, it ranked among the 3 most-watched shows in the entire country. In the 1967 to 1968 season, it sat at number 3 in the United States, and in its final season it finished second only to Laugh-In. On November 3, 1967, Gomer performed The Impossible Dream at a Navy relief show in Washington, D.C. backed by the actual United States Marine Band. The cameras caught something real that night, not a character performing a song, but a human being with an extraordinary gift using it in front of millions who could not believe what they were hearing. That moment stayed in people's memories so deeply that even Pink Floyd sampled Jim Nabors' famous catchphrase on their 1979 album The Wall. By 1969, he had gold-selling albums on Columbia Records, merchandise deals, military commendations, and a primetime variety show of his own. Carol Burnett loved him so much that she brought him back to open every single season premiere of her show from 1967 through 1978 because she genuinely believed his presence brought her good luck. He was at the absolute peak of everything. And then, because of a party joke he had nothing to do with, it all fell apart. Somewhere in the late 1960s, a gay couple in Huntington Beach, California, had become well known for throwing an enormous annual house party. They had a tradition of building each gathering around an elaborate joke theme printed on engraved invitations. Then, in either late 1970 or early 1971, they sent out a new invitation announcing in formal language that guests were cordially invited to the wedding reception of Rock Hudson and Jim Nabors. Inside that world, the joke made immediate sense. Rock Hudson was widely understood within the entertainment industry to be a closeted gay man, and Jim Nabors was understood the same way. The two were casual friends who had been photographed together publicly, but there was no romance between them, never had been. The joke was built entirely on wordplay. Put Rock Hudson together with Gomer Pyle, and you get Rock Pyle. For the people at that party, it was funny, and nothing more. What nobody predicted was that one guest would take that invitation home and show it to someone who worked at a national fan magazine. That magazine printed a story about it, and from there it moved fast. A Chicago radio disc jockey added details. Gossip columns picked it up. By the spring of 1971, rumors were spreading across the country that Rock Hudson and Jim Nabors had secretly gotten married. The rumor was completely false. There had been no wedding, no romance, and no relationship of any kind beyond casual friendship. The damage came fast. Both men were terrified. In an interview reprinted in a Canadian newspaper in July 1971, Nabors called the rumor vicious, unfounded, and unwarranted, and said it felt like a nightmare. When reporters asked him directly whether he was gay, he gave the answer he would keep giving for the next 4 decades, saying he had been so busy with his career that he had not given much thought to marriage. He considered suing the magazine, but his manager warned that a lawsuit would only drag more attention toward the story. After that, the two men came to a painful and formal understanding. They could no longer be seen together in public because any shared appearance would be treated as evidence. After one final television appearance together, they never spoke again. Not in person, not on the phone, not at events where they were in the same building. For the remaining 14 years of Rock Hudson's life, two men who had been friends lived in the same industry and shared not a single word. Hudson died on October 2, 1985. Jim Nabors did not attend the funeral. That same year, CBS carried out what became known as the Rural Purge, canceling a wave of rural-themed programming to appeal to younger urban viewers. The Beverly Hillbillies, Petticoat Junction, and Green Acres were all canceled, and the Jim Nabors Hour was swept away with them. Officially, the network cited a desire for a more modern image. Around the industry, people whispered something else entirely. The rumor about Jim Nabors had reached its peak only months before, and the timing was impossible to ignore. He was 41 years old, and his national primetime television career was over. He would never front a major network show again. His life moved quietly to Hawaii. In 1975, he was there for a concert residency with the Hilton hotel chain, and during that stay, he met a 27-year-old Honolulu firefighter named Stan Cadwallader. The relationship that followed lasted the rest of Jim Nabors' life. Cadwallader was 18 years younger than him, eventually left the fire department, and began managing Nabors' personal and business affairs full-time. They moved in together, and among friends in Hawaii and within the entertainment world, their relationship was no secret. The larger American public watching Gomer Pyle reruns through the 1980s and 1990s had no idea. Together, they bought a 500-acre farm in Hana on the rural eastern coast of Maui. The land produced macadamia nuts and tropical flowers, and the farm gave Jim something television fame never had. It gave him genuine privacy. Hana sits roughly 3 hours from the Maui airport along a narrow winding road, and that distance kept most of the outside world away. For a man who had spent a decade being recognized everywhere he went, that quiet was not a retreat. It was a relief. He kept performing through all of it, remaining a regular headline act in Las Vegas and singing with major symphony orchestras across the country. He recorded 28 studio albums over his career and earned 5 gold records and 1 platinum record. And every Memorial Day weekend, he showed up in Indiana and did something that became one of the most beloved traditions in American sports. In 1972, just 1 year after his variety show ended, he was invited to sing back home again in Indiana before the Indianapolis 500. The crowd responded in a way nobody had planned for, and the Speedway asked him back every year after that. He sang before the race from 1972 through 2014, missing only 1 year due to illness. Across those 42 years, the cumulative audience for his performances reached an estimated 300 million people. When asked about the applause, he always deflected, saying it was never really for him, and that it belonged to the song and the race and the feeling in the air. The people who knew him said that humility was not an act. It was simply who he was. Then, in the early 1990s on a vacation to India, Jim Nabors bought a traditional straight razor from a market stall, used it at his hotel to shave, and nicked himself. It seemed like nothing. About 2 years later, it nearly killed him. The razor had been contaminated with hepatitis B, and by 1990 the infection had moved so far through his system that his liver was failing. He told the Associated Press he had not felt truly sick, only tired. He went to a doctor because of the fatigue and was told his liver was no longer functioning. He needed a transplant, and the waiting list was long. He was 63 years old, and transplant priority in those years often favored younger patients. The person who stepped forward for him at that moment was Carol Burnett. She personally called donor coordination networks and liver specialists across the United States try to find him a match. She made the calls, helped locate the donor, and stood beside him through the entire crisis. The transplant was performed in 1994, and he survived. That one act of friendship gave him another 23 years of life. After his death, Carol Burnett told The Hollywood Reporter that her heart was heavy, that she was grateful he had been such a large part of her life, and that she missed him and loved him. Those words carried extra weight, coming from someone who had known the private man behind the public smile for more than 50 years. On January 15, 2013, 6 weeks after Washington state legalized same-sex marriage, Jim Nabors and Stan Cadwallader flew from Hawaii to Seattle. They checked into the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, and in their hotel room, with a judge present and a few close friends, they were married. Jim Nabors was 82 years old. Stan Cadwallader was 64. They had already been together for 38 years. The next morning, Jim gave a short interview to a local Hawaii news station. He spoke plainly, without drama or prepared statements. He said it had been pretty obvious that as a couple they had no rights, and that after 38 years something had to happen. He said he had never made a huge secret of his sexuality, though he had kept it personal, because it was personal. He said he felt blessed and was just very happy. That was how he came out to a country he had been entertaining since 1962. No grand announcement. No magazine cover. No tearful confession. He got married in a Seattle hotel room and told a local reporter he was happy. What followed surprised almost everyone. The reaction across America was overwhelmingly warm. There were no boycotts, no protests, no backlash from fans who had loved Gomer Pyle for 50 years. The Marines did not strip him of his honorary commission. The Indianapolis Motor Speedway welcomed him back in 2013 and again in 2014. For decades, Hollywood had operated on the belief that an actor of his generation could be destroyed by that kind of truth. Rock Hudson had once been so afraid of it that he cut off all contact with Jim Nabors in 1971. That fear had hung over Jim Nabors like a silent weapon for 42 years. And when he finally stepped into the open in his 80s, after 38 years with the same partner, nothing happened. The world had changed around him, and he had lived long enough to see it. On May 25, 2014, Jim Nabors walked onto the Indianapolis 500 stage one final time at 83 years old. The crowd was the largest the event had seen in its modern history, and many of the people in it understood, without being told, that this was probably the last time. His voice still carried that same richness people had waited for every Memorial Day for 4 decades. When he finished singing back home again in Indiana for the very last time, he waved and stepped back. He never sang in public again. On November 30th, 2017, at his home in Honolulu with Stan Cadwallader beside him, Jim Nabors died at the age of 87. Cadwallader told the Associated Press that his body had simply given out and released a short statement saying that everyone knew his husband had been a wonderful man and that he was going to be dearly missed. Within the hour, the United States Marine Corps posted a tribute that read, "Semper Fi, Gomer Pyle. Rest in peace, Jim Nabors." His funeral was held privately in Hawaii, and his ashes were divided between Honolulu and the family burial plot in Sylacauga, Alabama, where his parents and sisters had already been laid to rest. When America watched Gomer Pyle on Friday nights from 1964 to 1969, they believed they were watching a sweet, simple Marine from the rural South. What they were actually watching was a man with a business degree, a hidden operatic voice of extraordinary power, and a private life he had to protect in a country where being who he was could land a person in prison in 49 of 50 states. The comic innocence was crafted. The slow voice was a performance. The man underneath, according to everyone who actually knew him, was reserved, gentle, deeply in love with opera, and far more careful with his public image than anyone watching at home ever realized. Carol Burnett called him one of the kindest people she had ever known in the entertainment world. And in the end, that is the version of him that outlasted everything else. Not the rumor, not the cancellation, not the decades of silence. The kindness, the voice, the wave from the Indianapolis stage. The man who waited 38 years to call his partner his husband, and when he finally did, simply said he was happy. That was the real Jim Nabors. And now you know him.